Welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is Brewing with Underwhelming Commanders, episode 22. And we are starting out this week with Hok Tau, Honored Physician. And I'm sure I said that wrong. However, that's what I'm going with. So 1 green, human 1/2, tap, put target creature card from your graveyard on top of your library. And it has that very sort of obnoxious portal wording of activate only during your turn before attackers are declared. That really is an unnecessary sort of addition to this card that makes it worse. Unfortunately, they did that wording in the portal sets. I'm not sure exactly what the reasoning was. Nevertheless, we're going to work around it. Hopefully it doesn't hamper us too much. This really was, again, one of those commanders that when I saw it leading in the polls, I was like, oh, what am I going to do with that? That seems kind of boring. And again, the more I get into it and the more brewing I do, I'm like, oh, we could do this and we could do that. And there's lots of neat cards that work here. So let's get into it. First of all, we can just do like a value sacrifice theme. I got Caustic Caterpillar or Sakura Tribe Elder in play. I sacrifice them to do their abilities, right? Destroy an artifact or enchantment or get a land. Then I can just put them back on top of my library and draw them again next turn if I need to do one of those effects again, right? My opponent plays a Ristic Study. Okay, well, I'll just put that Caustic Caterpillar on top of my library so that I can maybe draw it the next turn. The great thing here about this is that your commander's ability says activate only during your turn before attackers are declared. So you can do this before your draw step, right? This doesn't have to be on your main phase. So on your upkeep, if your opponent has just played a Ristic Study or something, you can, before your draw step, put that Caustic Caterpillar back on top of your library so that you draw it on your turn. So that does work. Fauna Shaman is also a phenomenal fit here. And if you got the money for it, a Survival of the Fittest. Obviously, we chuck cards in our graveyard that we can then put on top of our library and then go search for another card is just going to work phenomenal in this scenario. Other ways we can get stuff in our graveyard. Satyr Wayfinder is a card that I've never actually put in a deck before. And this is a deck I think it actually works where we want the creatures in our graveyard, the land we want in our hand, so that works, right? It enters the battlefield, you reveal the top 4 cards of your library, put a land into your hand and the rest in your graveyard, which will probably be at least a couple of creatures, right? So that works. Vivian's Arkbow is another card that I don't see hardly ever in Commander. I think it's great. 1 and a green legendary artifact. Pay X and tap, discard a card, look at the top X cards of your library. You may put a creature card with converted mana cost X or less from among them onto the battlefield and put the rest on the bottom of your library in random order. So obviously there's going to be a ton of creatures in this deck. So hitting something off the top, even if we only put like 4 mana into this, I think you'll probably be able to get a creature off the top. And then also it's a discard outlet, right? We can even pay 0 for this if we just want to discard a creature into our graveyard. So I think that's a good fit. But of course, we really want to take advantage of that ability. So Call of the Wild and Zoologist are going to be the best ways to do this. Both of these are going to reveal the top card of our library. And if it's a creature card, we put it directly onto the battlefield. So that's where we really are going to get the power out of this commander is I discard a giant creature into my graveyard and then put it on top of my library with my commander. And then I can cheat it into play. Aid from the Cowl is another way to do this. At the beginning of your end step, if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn, you reveal the top card of your library. If it's a permanent card, you may put it onto the battlefield. So this works with all permanent, which of course includes creatures. And then Lurking Predators is just such a great fit here. This is one of those cards that you just saw all over the place back in the day, and you never see it anymore. People just shoehorn it into their mono green decks all the time just because you could get a huge blowout with it, right? 4 green enchantment. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card, put it onto the battlefield. Otherwise, you may put that card onto the bottom of your library. So again, if we have some giant creature in our graveyard, we just put it on top of our library and just wait for one of our opponents to cast a spell, which I imagine they're going to do probably before our next turn, right? Manipulating the top of our library will be important, so a Sensei's Divining Top or Mary's Guile would be great here. If we don't have our commander around, this is another way that we can use all these cheat off the top of our library effects, right? Where we can rearrange the top of our library to get that big creature on top. You could also throw like a Sylvan Tutor here that will just go get a giant creature and put it on top of your library, obviously. And then you just want to throw a bunch of huge creatures in your deck, of course, and I really like Krosan Tusker and Titanoth Rex because we can discard them them into our graveyard with their own abilities. Croson Tusker, we can cycle it and go get a land, so that's good, and then we can cheat it into play later. It's a 6/5, that's not bad. Titanoth Rex is an 11/11 with trample, so that one's really good. When we cycle it, we get to put a trample counter on our creatures, so we can put that on our Croson Tusker if we want to. But more importantly, for only 2 mana, we're putting it into our graveyard, and then we can flip it on top of our library and then cheat it into play. Gamekeeper is really an all-star in this deck. 3 and a green, 2/2 elf. When Gamekeeper dies, you may exile it if you do reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. Put that card onto the battlefield and put all other cards revealed this way into your graveyard. So you're going to want to have sacrifice effects here, obviously, so that you can put stuff in your graveyard when you want to. So this guy, we can now put a giant creature on top of our library, and that's going to be the first card we reveal when this guy dies, right? So we're going to sacrifice our Gamekeeper, reveal that giant creature off the top of our library, put it directly into play. So that works great here. Obviously, Evolutionary Leap and Birthing Pod are some of the best sacrifice effects in green, particularly Birthing Pod. This is I would say probably mostly a Birthing Pod deck. This is just an absolute all-star in this deck because not only are you putting those creatures in your graveyard, but you're upgrading, reusing them, all that kind of good stuff. And since we have a ton of really big green creatures in this deck, I would imagine 2 of my favorites, Dramatic Entrance and Lure of Prey, both work great here. Both of these cards are going to cheat green creatures into play. You can just put them directly onto the battlefield. You don't have to pay their casting cost, and you can do it at instant speed. So if you're in any deck where you have lots of green creatures that are probably going to be sitting in your hand, these cards are fantastic for cheating them into play. Again, a really interesting commander where it doesn't look like much. You put a creature card from your graveyard on top of your library, okay, whatever. But again, I started doing some brewing and looking at it, and I'm like, man, there is really a lot you can do here. Very interesting, I think. But moving on to number 2 this week, which is Gadrak, the Crown-Scourge, which this is a card that I knew I was eventually going to do on my Underwhelming Commanders video for sure. I tackled this when it first came out and I was like, oh, this is tough. I was excited about it. I liked it. It was unique. It was different. It was original. It wasn't super powerful. I know I wasn't going to be a target if it was in the command zone. And so I went after it and man, it's tough. So Gadrak is 2 and a red, 5/4 dragon with flying. Gadrak can't attack unless you control 4 or more artifacts, so that's not so bad. At the beginning of your end step, create a treasure token for each non-token creature that died this turn. So that's a pretty neat ability, and that's what you want to build around. So this is your opponent's creatures and yours as well, so you can do both. The fact that it's non-token really sort of holds you back, though. This card would be a lot better. I don't know, maybe too good if it was... I don't think it would be too good with tokens. Maybe it would. I don't know. It's hard to say, I guess. Nevertheless, this card has gotten a lot better because of all of that treasure token support that we've been getting lately. So the absolute auto includes in this deck are Goldspan Dragon, obviously, Zorn, which came out in Forgotten Realms, which doubles up your treasure tokens. I think you got to have Magda in this deck because she's making treasure tokens and also allows you to use those treasure tokens to go get stuff. Stormkilled Artist is another fantastic card that came out last year that is just an auto-include in the Gadrak deck, I think. And of course, Dockside Extortionist, if you can afford one, is also going to be a great include in this deck. I also like Treasure Map. That's a great fit here. 2 mana artifact, you tap to scry 1 and put a landmark counter on Treasure Map. Then if there are 3 or more landmark counters on it, you remove those counters and transform Treasure Map and create 3 treasure tokens. So fitting with the theme of making treasure tokens, but more importantly, once it flips over, it becomes Treasure Cove, which is a land, and you can tap it to add a colorless mana, but you can also tap it to sacrifice a treasure and draw a card. That's going to be a great fit in this deck because, you know, getting treasure tokens is nice. You can use them for mana, but I think this is one of those decks where you're going to be creating enough treasure tokens that you are going to have a bunch of extras lying around that you can now sacrifice to draw cards with. I also like Atsushi, the Blazing Sky. If you haven't seen this card yet, it's from the new set coming out, Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, and I think it's a good fit here. 2 red, Dragon Spirit, 4/4 with flying and trample. When it dies, choose 1. Exile the top 3 cards of your library until end of turn. You may play those cards, or you can create 3 treasure tokens. So it's a dragon. It's fitting that theme. It also is fitting the, you know, sometimes we want to sacrifice our own creatures to get the dice trigger off of our commander. So it fits that theme as well. And obviously it fits the treasure token theme as well. So I think that's a great fit in this deck. And of course, you absolutely have to have Academy Manufactor. I gushed over this card when it came out in Modern Horizons 2, and of course, I couldn't have been more right about it because any deck, like I said when I did my top 20 from that set, if your deck is making treasure tokens, food tokens, or clue tokens, it's an absolute auto-include because you're just getting even more value out of it. And in this deck, I think it's just almost busted because we're getting a food and a clue for each treasure token we're making. So if we, at the end step, get 4 treasure tokens, for example, we're going to get 4 food and 4 clues as well. Just great value in this deck. We got to be killing creatures though, right? I thought Mog Infestation was a great fit. This is the card that I went after when I first made my Gadrak deck because it destroys all creatures target player controls. And that's what we want, right? It's going to create those goblin tokens, which, you know, is unfortunately not as good. I thought this is a great fit because we're destroying their creatures. We get the dice trigger on our end step, and then they get more creatures that we can then kill. But of course, those are token creatures, and when we kill them, they're not going to get us anything. So it's not as good. It's still really, really good though, right? It's going to destroy all creatures target player controls. And so if one person has like 6 creatures, we can destroy all of them. Assuming they're non-tokens, we'll get 6 treasures on our end step. But I mean, Red's got lots of board wipes like Starstorm and Sweltering Sun. And these ones in particular, I think are good because they're not going to kill our commander, right? That's a very important part here. Our commander triggers on the end step. So if we just cast a Blasphemous Act, it's going to kill our commander as well. And on our end step, we won't get any treasure tokens. Our commander has to remain on the battlefield. So cards like Sweltering Sun deals 3 damage to each creature. That's going to kill a bunch of creatures, won't kill our commander. I think that's great. Or anything that deals damage to non-flying creatures like Earthquake or Fault Line will also be great, right? There's lots of those board wipe effects in Red that hit non-flying creatures. So that's not going to hit our commander at all. So we can just put as much mana into these as we want, kill a whole bunch of creatures. Our commander will be fine and we'll get all those treasure tokens. Obviously, we want some of our creatures to be going to the graveyard as well. Avalanche Riders and Sting Scourger are great. They have Echo, so we can bring them into play. We'll get the effect that we want out of them. And then on our upkeep, we just don't pay the Echo. They'll die. That's a creature dying. It's going to give us a treasure token. There are also lots of cards in Red like Ball Lightning and Blistering Firecat that will come into play. You attack with them immediately, and then at the beginning of the end step, you sacrifice them. And so obviously you're going to want to stack these triggers so that your creature sacrifices first, and then your Gadrak's trigger will resolve. And you could go a little bit of an artifact theme here if you wanted to go a little bit fringe with this. You look at cards like Burnished Heart or maybe Bottle Gnomes, right? Those are artifact creatures that we are sacrificing, right? You're going to sacrifice them on your turn, get that treasure token, and then you can Trash for Treasure or Goblin Welder them back into play, right? You can sacrifice the treasure token that you got. So you think about that Burnished Heart. I sacrifice it. I go get 2 lands. I get a treasure token on my end step. The next turn, I Goblin Welder it back into play by sacrificing the treasure token, because obviously getting 2 lands into play is better than getting a treasure token. So then I can sacrifice my Burnished Heart and repeat the process. So I think that's a pretty fantastic fit. All those treasure tokens we're getting, we have to take advantage of as well. Other than just I sacrifice them for mana, we can have a Gear Per Aether Grid in there, 2 and a red enchantment. Tap 2 untapped artifacts you control. Gear Per Aether Grid deals 1 damage to any target. So a card like this is great because you're going to have a lot of those treasure tokens lying around that I don't think you're going to want to sacrifice for mana right away. So this is a great way to just throw some damage around. Reckless Fireweaver is another great include here. 1 and a red, Human Artificer, 1/3. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So this can be even a win con where we just are creating lots of those treasure tokens and just pinging all of our opponents every time they enter the battlefield. And another obvious win con here is Hellkite Tyrant. You know, again, it fits the dragon theme. We can even go fetch this with our Magda if we happen to have our Magda kicking around. And at the beginning of our upkeep, if we control 20 or more artifacts, we win the game. Now, typically people use this to steal their opponent's artifacts to get to that 20, but this includes tokens. So if we can actually get up to 20 treasure tokens or enough to get 20 artifacts in play, this can be a win con in the deck. So that's a great fit. And again, Gadrak, another commander that I was just like, oh man, there's not much going on there. What am I going to do with this? And I actually ended up doing a lot. Again, you could even just do like an artifact creature theme where you're sacrificing your own artifact creatures and then getting them back, because Red does have quite a bit of red artifact recursion, so you can even go that route. But moving on to our number one commander this week, and it is Meloku, the Clouded Mirror. And I was really impressed with all of the commanders this week, and I think it's likely that I will be taking one of these decks as my own. One of these commanders I think I'm probably going to make for myself, because I really was impressed with all of them. Again, Meloku looks maybe on its face like it's not doing a whole lot, but there's just a ton you can do with this deck. This card was a real powerhouse back in the day. I remember when it was in Standard, it was just busted. People were calling for it to get banned, I think, even because of that ability, right? So Meloku is a 4 and a blue Moonfolk Wizard, 2/4 with flying, and you pay 1, return a land you control to its owner's hand, and create a 1/1 blue illusion creature token with flying. So the reason why that ability is so good is because obviously you tap the land that you're going to return to your hand for mana, right? When you activate the ability, you have to pay 1. So the land that you've just tapped for mana, you return to your hand. So I can tap 5 lands and return all 5 lands to my hand, create 5 illusion tokens, right? In a standard format, this card really got out of hand fast. So there's a lot going on here. There really, really is. So first of all, we're making tokens. I thought Curiosity Crafter was a great fit here. You have no maximum hand size, which is going to be important. We have a bunch of no maximum hand size cards in this deck because we are going to have a lot of drawing. So first of all, we're going to be drawing off of this guy. Whenever a creature token you control deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. We have a lot of effects like that, but also because we're picking up our lands, it's going to be filling our hand even more, and we don't want to get into a situation where we're going to have to discard any of those cards. And you really could, if you wanted to, with Meloku. You can go completely a hand size matters sort of scenario, because it's really easy to fill your hand and make a huge hand size with Meloku because you can be picking up your lands all the time. Junkwinder, another absolute auto include, I think, in a Meloku deck, because whenever a token enters the battlefield under your control, you tap target non-land permanent and opponent controls. It doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. All those tokens we are creating are going to trigger this, and it also has affinity for tokens. So even though it costs 5 blue, it's probably only going to cost a blue and a blue to get it into play. And those tokens are illusions, so Krovakin Mist and Lord of the Unreal are going to be auto includes, I think. Krovakin Mist is a 1 and a blue illusion with flying that has power and toughness equal to the number of illusions on the battlefield. And Lord of Unreal, blue and a blue human wizard 2/2 illusions you control get +1/+1 and have hexproof. And Min Wily Illusionist I thought was also a perfect fit here. Whenever we draw our second card each turn, we're going to get an illusion token. This creature gets +1/+1 for each other illusion you control. So obviously that all fits with what we're doing, and I think with all the draw effects we have in this deck, we will be getting that second draw trigger a lot. But even if we don't, the second ability, whenever an illusion you control dies, you may put a permanent card with less than or equal to that creature's power from your hand on the battlefield. That ability is an absolute perfect fit here because we are going to be picking up all our lands. So the illusions we make with Min are going to be big. They're going to have a big power. The illusions we make with Meloku are only going to be 1/1s. They're not going to get any bigger, but a 1 power means we can put a land back into play, right? I mean, if you really want to go nuts here, your opponent's about to board wipe, you can actually pick up all your lands, and then when all those illusion tokens that you just created die, you can then put all your lands back into play, right? And get a bunch of landfall triggers maybe, get a bunch of Junkwinder triggers maybe, something like that. It's just really a neat interaction where Min and Meloku really play off of each other with what they're doing. So that's an auto include in a Meloku deck, I think. Our creatures are also flying, right? Our commander and our illusion tokens. So Favorable Winds is going to go in here. I think Gravitational Shift is also a great include. Gonna pump our team. I also like Siani, Eye of the Storm in this deck. Whenever Siani, Eye of the Storm attacks, scry X, where X is the number of attacking creatures with flying. We are going to be attacking a lot. No question about that at all. Those illusion tokens we are making, that's how we're going to win the game. I think we're going to win the game with this deck by just attacking with our team of flyers. That's why we want to pump them up. Wind Reader Sphinx, also a great fit here. 5 blue Sphinx, 3/7 with flying. Whenever a creature with flying attacks, you draw a card. So there's some of that drawing we're getting into, and there's more where that came from. This card, actually, the funny thing about it is whenever any creature with flying attacks, you get to draw a card. So even if your opponents attack with flying creatures, you get to draw. I also got Signal Pest here. I thought this was a good fit. 1 mana, 0/1. It's a pest, and it's an artifact creature, and has battle Battle Cry. Whenever it attacks, each other attacking creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. So again, we got like 5 of those illusion tokens. Buffing them all by 1, I think, is definitely going to be helpful. So now instead of taking 5 damage, our opponents are taking 10. I think that's definitely worth putting in here. I also threw Hour of Need in here. I thought this was a good fit. 2 and a blue instant, has Strive. Hour of Need costs 1 and a blue, more to cast for each target beyond the first. Exile any number of target creatures for each creature exiled this way. Its controller puts a 4/4 blue Sphinx creature token flying onto the battlefield. So very similar to Curse of the Swine, where you can use it as sort of a board wipe, remove a bunch of your opponent's creatures. It's a little pricey that way, plus giving your opponents 4/4 blue Sphinxes is, that's kind of a lot. They have flying. They're going to beat you down with them. If you're in a desperate situation, like your opponent has a Blightsteel Colossus, you can definitely use it for that, no question. However, we can also use it on our team, right? And it is an instant. Maybe we leave some mana open, and on our opponent's end step, we can exile 2 or 3 or 4 of our own illusion tokens and turn them into 4/4s. I think that's pretty good. Also got Military Intelligence in this deck and Kindred Discovery. Again, some more of that card draw. Military Intelligence, 1 and a blue enchantment. Whenever you attack with 2 or more creatures, draw a card. So that's going to be happening probably every turn. And Kindred Discovery is just bonkers in this deck because you choose a creature type, and we're going to choose illusion here, right? We're not going to choose our commander. We're going to choose what our commander is making, which are illusion tokens, because whenever a creature you control of the chosen type enters the battlefield or attacks, you draw a card. That's bananas in this deck, because obviously those illusion tokens, even though they're tokens, they are entering the battlefield. So every time we make one, we get a trigger off of this, and every time they attack, we get a trigger off of this. So we're going to be drawing a ton of cards off of this. It's ridiculous in this deck, I think. A little bit more of the Moonfolk thing, just a little bit. I put Soratami Savant in this deck and Patron of the Moon. So Soratami Savant is doing, again, the same picking up lands thing. I thought this was the one that had the ability that was worth it. Pay 3 and return a land you control the owner's hand. Counter dark spell unless its controller pays 3. That's pretty good. That can definitely save our life in certain situations. Patron of the Moon is also great here. 5 blue spirit, 5/4 with Moonfolk Offering, and we can actually use that on our commander if we want to. If I'm playing this deck, I probably will leave Patron of the Moon in my hand, and when someone goes to remove my commander, I can flash this out, right? You can do it at instant speed. We sacrifice our Meloku and put Patron of the Moon into play, and our Patron of the Moon is going to cost just a blue and a blue, because it's going to cost 5 less because we're sacrificing Meloku. And then it's a 5/4 flyer, but more importantly, we can pay 1 and put up to 2 land cards from your hand into play tapped, which works great with what we're doing there. So this can really be fantastic where, again, my opponent's about to remove my commander, and in response, I can tap a bunch of my lands, return them to my hand to create those illusion tokens, then sacrifice my Meloku to put the Patron of the Moon into play, and then use the Patron's ability to put the lands I just picked up back into play. Really great synergy there. I also threw Moonblade Shinobi in here. This is an interesting fit. It's a ninja. 3 and a blue, human ninja 3/2, has ninjutsu 2 and a blue, and of course that means you can return an unblocked attacker you control to hand and put it onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. And we have a lot of those illusion tokens. It's really going to be easy to get those ninjutsu triggers. And again, if you want to go that route, you could make a mono blue ninja deck here because of all the illusion tokens you're making. It's going to make it really easy to do that. But then also, when Moonblade Shinobi deals combat damage to a player, we get to create a 1/1 blue illusion creature token flying. So I think that's fitting everything we're doing here. Of course, another thing we're doing in this deck is picking up lands, so we got to put them back into play. Walking Atlas and Scare Tiller are great ways that we can do this in a mono blue deck. I also have Terrain Generator here, Commander Classic that you don't see nearly as much anymore, that will put basic lands from our hand directly into play. Trade Routes is also another great fit here. 1 and a blue enchantment. You can pay 1 and return a land you control to owner's hand, which again fits with what we're doing, but because we're doing that a lot already, we probably won't be using that first ability. More importantly, you can pay 1 and discard a land card to draw a card. So this is a great way where maybe if our hand is getting a little light, we can pick up some lands with our commander's ability, make some illusion tokens, and then discard them to this to draw cards. Another thing we can do in this deck is play like a Ward of Bones, which is an interesting fit in this deck because each opponent who controls more lands than you can't play lands. So you can pick up your land lands to prevent your opponents from putting lands into play. You know, that's another neat thing you can do with Meloku, where you can manipulate the number of lands you have in play. Surveyor's Scope, another deck, again, that I found a great fit for this card. 2-mana artifact, tap it and exile it. Search your library for up to X basic land cards, where X is the number of players who control at least 2 or more lands than you. Put those cards onto the battlefield, then shuffle. So we can manipulate again. We can pick up a bunch of lands to ensure that there are 3 opponents with 2 or more lands than us, so that when we crack this, we can put 3 lands directly into play. So that's a great fit. Another neat thing we can do is with Quicksilver Fountain. 3 mana artifact at the beginning of each player's upkeep. That player puts a flood counter on target non-island land they control of their choice. The land is an island for as long as it has a flood counter on it. At the beginning of each end step, if all lands on the battlefield are islands, remove all flood counters from them. So I think this is a great fit in any mono blue deck, because it's not going to really hurt you at all. It's going to shut off some of your non-basic lands maybe, but then when all lands are islands, it removes all the counters, so everything goes back to normal. In this deck, though, again, we can pick up our lands. So if we have one of our non-island lands in play, like say we got a Ghost Quarter in play, we put that flood counter on it at the beginning of our upkeep, now we can pick it up with our commander, right? And obviously when we pick it up, the counter goes away, and then replay it again, so that at the beginning of our end step, we will have a land in play that isn't an island, right? Because now it goes back to being a Ghost Quarter. So we can manipulate this with our commander so that there is always going to be a land in play that isn't an island. So any of our opponents that, you know, want to play any other color other than blue are going to be in a really tight bind with this, I think. A couple other really neat things we're doing here. I like Abjure in this deck. I really like Abjure in general. I just talked about this with, you know, counter spells that I think are underplayed that see more play. 1 blue mana instant. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a blue permanent and you counter target spell. This is a hard counter spell. For 1 mana, counter anything. This isn't non-creature or anything like that. This is counter anything for 1 mana. You just have to sacrifice a blue permanent, and we got lots of those lying around, right? Those illusions that we are creating are blue, so we can just sacrifice a token. So this becomes an incredible counterspell in the deck. I also really like Baron in this deck, because at the beginning of our end step, if a permanent was put into our hand from the battlefield, we get to draw a card. So again, it fits with what we're doing. We pick up a land if we want to get this trigger. We get that draw. I also really like Mystic Reflection in this deck. 1 in a blue instant. Choose target non-legendary creature. The next time 1 or more creatures or planeswalkers enter the battlefield this turn, they enter as copies of the chosen creatures. So this includes tokens, right? What we can do is, if our opponent has a really fantastic creature that we want, say they got a Vorinclex in play or something like that, we can cast this, and we can do it from Foretell because it has Foretell 1 blue. And the next time 1 or more creatures or planeswalker enter the battlefield this turn, we can just immediately use our commander's ability to create an illusion token, and that illusion token will come into play as a copy of the Vorinclex, right? Because that's what we chose. And then Triskaidekaphile is just an absolute auto-include again in this deck, because it is just such an easy win con. Again, the hand size matters scenario here is really easy with Meloku, where it's super easy to, yes, manipulate the lands you have in play, but it's also super easy to manipulate the cards in your hand. It's so easy to win the game with this card, I think, because at the beginning of your upkeep, if you have exactly 13 cards in hand, you win the game. So we put this down and then we just sit there, right? Let's say we have 7 cards in hand. What we have to do is pick up 6 lands, right? We just pick up 6 lands on our opponent's end step with our commander's ability, and now we have exactly 13. We win the game. No matter what cards we have in hand, we just then manipulate it to pick up however many lands we want to get exactly 13. It's really easy to win the game with this card, I think, in this deck. Just a really fantastic, fun commander. I can't believe this one isn't more popular. Again, I don't even know if I would consider this underwhelming, because you're doing so much. It's a really powerful ability, what your commander has, but I can manipulate the amount of lands I have in play. I can manipulate the amount of cards I have in my hand very easily. I'm making tokens. My tokens have flying. They're also illusions. There's a lot going on here. Really fantastic commander. I'm super impressed with how this deck turned out. Of course, the deck list for it is in the description below. Check it out if you want to. And of course, also the poll for the next Underwhelming Commanders video is in the description as well. Go vote to see which commander you want to see in the next episode. But that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.